I like this Daniel Smith stuff, but
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Daniel Smith presentation with Scott Stevenson, all about quinacridones and Lightfastness. This should be a really exciting session. So, welcome, Scott.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you everybody for your time today. I was very much looking forward to today and talking about these two subjects. I think they are both fascinating and really important for artists to understand. And just a little introduction about who I am. I'm Scott Stevenson. I am a brand ambassador for Daniel Smith. I'm also a sales rep for them. So my primary responsibility is to work with retail stores and art groups like watercolor societies across Canada, the US, and Mexico. So I spend a lot of time doing that. But really, the thing that I'm most happy that I get to do is education. I love all things Daniel Smith. I was actually a user of Daniel Smith before I became a sales rep and brand ambassador for them. My time in watercolor actually started way back in 1997 when my son was a newborn and he was, let's just say, difficult. So he would wake up in the middle of the night at around 1 o'clock, and then he wouldn't go down until sometime closer to 4. And during this time, I was working three jobs. I was working with the United States Forest Service on the Angeles National Forest in California. And then I had another job where I worked for a Boeing Fire Department in Long Beach. And then if I had any time left, I would work at a ski rental shop where I would fit people with snow skis. So even though I had all of these jobs, I still had to figure out a way to get my wife some sleep somehow. And initially, when this would happen, I would just put my son in the car seat and we would go for a drive. But I quickly figured out that this wasn't the best idea because putting my son my screaming son in a car seat at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm exhausted was probably not the best idea. So I had to figure out another way, and I discovered watercolor for this. So I would wake up in the middle of the night and grab my son, and we would go to the kitchen table where I would put him in my left arm and have a brush in my right, and I would make an attempt to create art. So mostly, I'm pretty sure by most reasonable judgment that I was probably just making abstract art back then. But that was how I got my start into watercolor. My first big investment in watercolor was a probably a $9.99 set of praying watercolor pans. And initially, I was, fairly happy with that. And and then one day I had a friend do a terrible thing, and he gave me a tube of the Daniel Smith Mayan Blue. And I was a little confused to say the least. So I couldn't initially figure out what was the what paints were actually better until I started blending the two, and I was like, this isn't making a whole lot of sense. So it took me just a little bit of time to figure out that the Daniel Smith was actually the better product, and then I became one of these people who would pick up every penny, nickel, and dime that he could find in order to save for his next tube of paint. So time goes on, and I'm not doing the firefighting thing any longer, and I go to work for my family business, which is working with companies like Daniel Smith and introducing them to stores like Delta. So I started doing this while I was still using Daniel Smith watercolor, and I would see Catherine Taylor, the president of Daniel Smith, at the trade shows, and I was a total fanboy. I would walk right up to the table and say, can I have a doc card, please? And then Catherine would, give me the doc card and, more or less say, can you just go away now? If I give you what you want, will you just leave? So, so anytime I ever saw her, I was always begging for a doc card. And one day, after I'd gotten to know her a little bit because of industry events and things like that, trade shows, and I got a call from her one day, and she said, "Hey, Scott, I think it's probably time that that we make you one of our sales reps." And at the time, I thought I was being pranked. Everybody has a friend who has somebody that likes to play jokes, and I was pretty sure that my friend had gotten his mom on the phone to impersonate Catherine, and Catherine, and so I was thinking to myself, no, no, not today. I'm sorry. No, this is just too surreal. So I started to be a little coy, and then after a while, I could hear Catherine kind of sounding like she was a little disappointed, and the alarm bells went off, and I was just like, oh no, what if this really is her? And I started to kind of go through all of the scenarios in my head, and I said, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Well, he'll probably give me a bad time for about a week, and then he'll move on to somebody else. So I said, absolutely, I can start next week. And she said, great. And she said, well, what can we send you? And I paused for a second, and I let a little bit of time go by, and I go, are you are you talking about paint? And she said, yeah, what do you want? And I said, well, how many colors do we have? And I already knew the answer to that question, of course, right? So she says, oh, we have 231. And I was just like, well, I kind of need them all. How do I know what I want until I actually have an opportunity to try everything? And she thought that was pretty hilarious and laughed at me for another few minutes. But then that really kind of got me started on my journey with Daniel Smith to the point to where I am now, where I'm responsible for all of Canada, the U.S. and Mexico. So I do travel quite a bit, as you might imagine. I probably travel anywhere between 12 and 15 weeks a year, traveling to kind of all points in between, doing sales and also doing education. So I became a brand ambassador for Daniel Smith in 2019, kind of an interesting story there. There was a retailer in Auburn, California, small little town outside of Sacramento, and I was trying to sell him some Daniel Smith paint for him to bring into his store. And he said, I like this Daniel Smith stuff, but I need you to come in and, and talk to my customers. And I was like, I don't do crowds. And he's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Unless you do this, then I'm not going to bring the paint in. And I was just like, all right. So he kind of coached me on what I needed to do to be prepared, and I showed up that day, and I was totally sweating bullets. And so I went through and did the demo, did the presentation, and I was like, oh, this wasn't so bad. I could do this. And then suddenly I started to do more and more and more. And then one day, Daniel Smith customer service got started getting these phone calls and emails from artists who were saying, "Oh yeah, we had a great time, getting to know Scott and learning more about Daniel Smith." And then one day I got a phone call from Catherine, and she's like, "Are you out there doing presentations and demos and things like that?" And I said, yeah, because I was thinking I was in trouble. And she goes, no, 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 you're not in trouble. I think we just probably need to make you a brand ambassador and then turn you loose. So in 2019, they made me a brand ambassador. So that's kind of my story. You are group 536. I've done 536 of these, some on Zoom, mostly in person. But I've done quite a few of these now. I love doing them. And the first thing I want you to know is that this is really a conversation. I want everybody to kind of feel like they have the opportunity to be able to ask questions. I probably won't be able to take them by voice, but I would love to answer all of your questions today as best as I can. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about two subjects that I think are very important, very relative to the to watercolor. We're going to talk about lightfastness, and we're going to talk about the quinacridone pigments. Both of those subjects to me are really important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to share my screen, and we will get this going. Okay. So just a little bit of history about Daniel Smith. It was founded in 1976 by this gentleman here, Mr. Daniel Smith. He's the founder of our company. To me, he's kind of like the grandfather of modern watercolor. A lot of what Daniel Smith has been able to do out of the years is really to completely redefine what watercolor is. To be able to bring innovative technologies, innovative pigments, processes, and things that were in place that no other manufacturer had. So Mr. Daniel Smith here actually got started in art materials in 1976, where he worked at the University of Washington, where they printed the school newspaper. And they were having issues with the ink, and people were wondering where it is they could get a better ink. And Dan was the only one that actually was able to offer a solution. What he did was he wanted to make his own ink. And so he did a lot of research. And then, of course, back in 1976, we didn't have ChatGPT or Google to be able to kind of find manufacturers of pigment. So Dan did a lot of research at the public library and found a pigment manufacturer that would work. And he went ahead and ordered some. And then he found a local company actually to make the binder. So he took the ingredients back to his parents' house. He made the first batch of ink, and they put it on the press, and it was much better than what they were using. And of course, it didn't take long for the art department at the school to hear about this wonderful new ink, and they wanted Dan to make them a batch. So Dan went ahead and did that, and he was excited to do it because he's like, wow, this is like the best side hustle ever. I don't have to drive anywhere to go to a second job. I can do this in my spare time, and things were going really well. And to the point to where Dan was ending up having to work like 20 hours a day just to keep up with the orders from the school, and of course his day job. So time goes on, and Dan is really happy with this second business that he has. And then he decides to open a retail store in downtown Seattle in 1982. It's the store that became Daniel Smith Artist Materials. It was down there in downtown Seattle, right near where the American football team, the Seattle Seahawks, play. And so he opened the store in 82, but the store also allowed him not only to sell other products, but it also gave him the facilities to create his next round of products. So in 1988, Daniel Smith made his second product, which was the Daniel Smith Original Oils. So those were fantastic products. But after we closed down the catalog and our website to sell, We quickly found ourselves with diminishing sales on the oils, and the oils were eventually discontinued. But it wasn't until 1993 that Dan decided that he wanted to make watercolor, along with his young protege, John Cogley. John Cogley was his assistant, actually his IT guy, and then he promoted him to president. So in 1993, Dan and John decided they wanted to make watercolor, but neither one of them really understood exactly what what a watercolor artist would want from a paint. So they did a lot of research. Dan went and traveled the world and talked with a lot of artists about what they would want from a watercolor, and then brought all of that information back, and they created their first batches of color. Initially, we had 18 colors. And then these same artists were also testing the paint, and they came back and they loved it. They started using it in their work, giving Dan credit, and giving them all sorts of accolades in terms of workshops and things like that. So things really started to build. And then as time moved on, Dan decided that he wanted to be one of the real innovators in watercolor, and that's when he came out with the Primatech collection. So those of you who might have been with us in my last presentation know that we talked a lot about how Daniel Smith takes minerals and actually turns them into pigment for watercolor. So that was something unique he did. And then later on, Dan decided that he wanted to introduce a whole new range of colors from the quinacridone family of pigments. So that's kind of how we got going. So let's dive in here. So I think one of the first things that's important to talk about is really how simple we make our formulation of watercolor. We only use the pigment or mineral, gum arabic, and distilled water when we make our paint. Those are the only ingredients that go into it. It actually comes from the acacia tree. So the vast majority of the world's gum arabic comes from the acacia tree. From this part of the world, so that whole area below sub-Saharan Africa. So we're talking about countries like the Sudan, Chad, basically that whole band of countries that you see there produce the majority of the world's gum arabic. So gum arabic is wonderful for a binder because A, it is sticky. Two, but over time it's really been tested, and it's also been confirmed to be very stable when blended with other things. So the gum arabic acts as the binder. It's sticky, so it wants to hold the ingredients together. So it's holding the pigment and the distilled water all together in individual clumps, or what we call our solution of paint. So gum arabic is really important. It holds everything together. And gum arabic is actually made in several different grades. The purest grade of gum arabic actually goes to the pharmaceutical industry, where this grade of gum arabic is used to create the capsules that the pharmaceutical industry puts their medicines in. So gum arabic has been used all the way back into the 1200s, so it's been a tried and true product. And Daniel Smith actually uses pharmaceutical grade gum arabic to use because it is the most pure, and it doesn't have any other particulates in it that we would call variables. And when we have a paint making process that is precise as ours is, we leave nothing to chance. So we want to make sure that the gum arabic that we use doesn't have any other particulates in it that might make it harder for us to be consistent from batch to batch. So here's the acacia tree. What's interesting about this is that they need to let the acacia tree age for 10 years before they can before they can harvest the sap. And the way that they harvest the sap is to take a knife or a machete and score the branch so that the sap will well to the top. So it kind of wells to the top of the branches and it comes out kind of in these balls of sap. And then the farm workers then go and harvest the sap by just pulling the sap directly from the branches of this tree. And then from there, it is taken to a processing plant where it is purified into different grades. So we talked a little bit about the pharmaceutical grade, but then from there, the second most pure process or grade is food grade. So gum arabic is used a lot in food, in certain foods where food manufacturers want something to be able to create more texture. So gum arabic is also used in that way. And of course, gum arabic is used in chewing gum and other sorts of chewy snacks and things like that. So let's get into the meat of what we're talking about today. So lightfastness is a particular pigment's ability to resist ultraviolet light. So every pigment has a different ability to do this. Every pigment, by the way, fades. It's just at which rate or at what rate does it fade. So what we wanted to do is that we wanted to be able to quantify how light fast each of our colors are. So the way we do this is that we have a machine and it's called a xenon fadeometer. It's a machine that generates xenon light, which is extremely bright. Basically, this machine is designed to replicate the ultraviolet light that you and I see every day at noon, actually. So if you think about a bright sunny day at 12 noon, that is the quality of light that we're attempting to replicate. So this light in this machine, it's able to synthesize over 120 years worth of light exposure, but it does that. It replicates it in 4 days. So think about that. So 120 years times 365 days. So 120 times 365. And that is what we were able to replicate in 4 days. So this machine is about the size of your refrigerator, and it's probably about, I would say, 36 inches deep. And then on the inside, it looks like this. So on the inside, there is a carousel that we put our paint outs in, and these paint outs sit in the carousel, and then in the middle of the carousel, there's a rod that comes down. And then that rod has a light bulb in the middle of it, and it is a light bulb that creates xenon light. So xenon light, by the way, is the brightest light that man has ever been able to reproduce outside of a nuclear explosion. It is extremely bright. And actually, this machine actually gets so hot that if we didn't put distilled water down the center of that rod that you see there, the entire machine actually would melt. You might even see a hose, what looks to be like a hose or tube, that connects the top end of the rod to the bottom, and that tube delivers water, distilled water, to the bottom there, and that's what keeps the rod and the light from actually melting the machine itself. So this machine produces an extremely bright amount of light. So basically, the light is projected onto those paint outs where it tries to actually fade the paint outs. So then after the 4 days, we take the paint outs out and then we put them next to a template. And based upon the amount of fading that we see with that template, helps us to determine what the light fastness rating of our colors are. And that information then, of course, goes into our color chart where we tell you what the light fastness rating of the color is. that is how we test for light fastness. So why is it important to understand the light fastness rating of the colors in your palette? What do you think your painting will look like if you have three colors that are light fast and then you have one that is not? What will that look like over time? Wouldn't your painting look kind of funny if you had some parts of your painting that looks bright and vibrant, and then you had other parts of your painting that looked kind of faded? So that's the important part here, is that when you are creating your palette, that you are looking not just whether it looks good or not, or whether the color is appealing or not. You want to look to see that the colors are gonna age kind of in unison, because what you don't want to have happen over time is to have some of your colors still look vibrant and then others look faded. So by understanding the light fastness rating of the colors that you have in your palette, it just helps you to safeguard that your work is actually going to age gracefully over time and age in unison. That's important. So at the end of the 4 days, like I mentioned, we compare the colors against a template that informs our color chart. So let me also say that, so we only have two colors in our entire range that are fugitive. One of them, of course, is opera pink, that you see there to the right. Opera pink is interesting because it's actually made from two things. It's made from a fluorescent dye, which is what gives it its fluorescent look. And then we also blend in quinacridone lilac. So the reason why we do that is, as the fluorescent aspect of opera pink begins to fade, that you're not left with color, or left with basically with white paper. The quinacridone lilac is actually is light fast, but what happens is the fluorescent aspect of opera pink begins to fade. What tends to happen, or what you will see, is just a gentle pink that is in the background, not fluorescent anymore. Then again, it's better than looking at white paper. So let's talk about the other fugitive color, or color that is not light fast, and that is why we have alizarin crimson. I'm going to stop for a second. There's a good question here. Tell us why fluorescent paints fade. That's a really great question. So in the way that dyes are constructed, a lot of them are bright and vibrant and beautiful, but the light, the materials that the dye is made from just don't hold up well to light. The light breaks down their chemical structure and starts to make the color neutral. So fluorescent colors with that dye tend to have the building blocks of the dye tend to make it so that the light actually begins to break down the particles from which the dye is made from. Alizarin crimson, interestingly enough, is not made from a dye. It's actually made from a pigment. But just like dyes have the ability to be broken down by sunlight, pigments can as well. Alizarin crimson is one of those pigments that breaks down very quickly when exposed to ultraviolet light. So what does quickly mean? So quickly, in the way that we view it, is that it'll start to break down within 15 to 20 years. What that doesn't take into account is the way that the color or your piece is protected. So you can put these colors behind glass, and it will extend it will extend the light fastness, because the museum glass, then is able to filtrate a lot of the light out, but it doesn't filter all of it out. So while it may extend the brightness and the beauty and the beauty of the color over time, even UV glass, with its structure, does allow UV light through, and it does still continue to make the color fade, but at a much more reduced rate. So those are the two colors that are in our line that are fugitive. So let's look at them in a little bit more detail. So we're gonna look at a comparison here between alizarin crimson, the original version, single pigment version, and the permanent version of alizarin crimson we created. So there was a lot of outcry within the artist world about having this particular color because it was a very neutral color. A lot of artists had it in their palette to be able to use for mixing. It was a single pigment red that was kind of lush and juicy and vibrant, and it was single pigment, and it really helped you create very clean blends or mixes. So there was an outcry for that, and people wanted us to create a permanent version. So we went ahead and synthesized 3 separate pigments to do that in order to create the color that was very close in the way that it looked. Well, what is the disadvantage of having a red that already has 3 pigments in it? What is it that having this many pigments could pose a problem with? It can make a muddy color. So even though we wanted to create this color as an alternative, we couldn't do it without not using 3 light fast pigments. But as is mentioned here, when you have multiple pigments involved, it makes it so that it's possible that you could create a muddy color. So we went ahead and created this permanent version anyway, just so that artists, if they chose to use it as a standalone color, that they would have that option available to them. So the permanent version uses pigment red, 177th shade, PV19, which is also known as quinacridone red, and PR149, pigment red, 149th shade. So those 3 pigments went into making our permanent alizarin crimson. So we use that xenon phaedometer, and that xenon phaedometer is really what informs us as to what the light fastness rating of these colors are, or our colors are. So every single batch of paint is tested for light fastness. So let's say we're making a batch of quinacridone red, and we don't fully use a 50-pound bag of pigment. So even though the first batch tested fine, we never, ever take for granted that our process is designed to make it so that we have consistency. So every single batch of paint we make goes through this xenon phaedometer, and we test all of our colors for light fastness. So every single batch is tested for consistency, which we use that photo spectrometer for. And then it's also tested for light fastness. So every single batch of paint is tested. We don't take for granted that just because the first batch of paint from the bag of pigment was fine, that it will be fine in the second bag. So it just, when you have a process in place, you want to make sure that that you're consistent from batch to batch, because that's what you as artists demand from us. Any questions about light fastness?
There was a question from Karen who asked, is this alizarin pigment made from the madder root?
No, it is not made from rose madder roots. It is a synthetic. It's made from a synthetic pigment. This means that this particular pigment was developed in a lab and did not use a organic product in order to make the pigment. It is fully synthetic.
There was another question going back to the fluorescent paints and them fading.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know, does that apply to all items or textiles that are fluorescent in color?
Yes, that is the one consistent thing with dyes from application to application is that eventually sunlight or UV light breaks down the building blocks of the dye, and they start to lose their fluorescent aspect to them. Unless the color is treated with something as a protectant over the particles, then the product will then still end up fading over time. In other mediums, like acrylics, for example, you do see fluorescent colors, but because it's blended with a different binder, and when we're talking about acrylic, we're talking about resin. The resin actually helps create a barrier between the particles of the dye and the sunlight. That's not the same sort of option that we have with watercolor with using gum arabic. So depending upon the application, dye-based, fluorescent-based colors can last longer when exposed to light, sheerly from the binder in which it's made from. I want to talk about some of the other things as we talk about some of the other aspects that are associated with our colors. I wanted to talk a little bit about granulation for a moment. Granulation is this textured effect, and granulation exists in many different parts of our line in many different colors. So one of the really interesting things about our process is that even though colors can be either natural, like this one, green apatite, which is a Primatech color made from a mineral, or a synthetic color, even colors like quinacridones, for example, we can make colors granulate just by manipulating what the particle size is. So even though quinacridone is a synthetic pigment, depending upon what size or what micron we refine the pigment down to, we can decide whether a color will granulate or not granulate. So that'll come into a little bit more play as we get into the conversation about quinacridone. All right, so let's get into quinacridone. So quin in Latin means 5. Cridone in Latin means rings. So 5 rings. So if you look at your screen there and you look just below the word quinacridone, you see the molecular diagram for a quinacridone pigment. So somebody tell me, how many rings or circles do you see below the word quinacridone? 5. Yep. So that's what that word means, 5 rings, and that's describing the chemical structure of quinacridone. So what is quinacridone itself? Quinacridone is a family of pigments that is different, like phthalos are a different family of pigments, just like parylene are a different family. Hanses, you name it. Quinacridone, and what makes all of those colors different is their building blocks, meaning what the colors are actually made from, or what the pigment is actually made from. Quinacridone pigments are synthetic. They're created in a lab, but they're considered what we call organic, meaning what that means is pigments are either made from inorganic materials or organic materials. Organic materials are things that are typically found in the atmosphere or found in the earth. Inorganic pigments tend to be things that you find on a periodic chart that have a lot of funny names. So quinacridones are interesting because even though it's synthetic, it's actually made from organic materials. So they're made from things like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen in specific amounts under a lot of heat, create the quinacridone pigment. So what is the history of quinacridone? How was it discovered? It was discovered in the late 1890s by a German chemist who likely didn't know what he had. And back then, patents weren't really a thing back then. They weren't really viewed as necessary. So this chemist went ahead and created the pigment, and it literally was lost for years and years and years until the DuPont Paint Corporation took an order from an automotive manufacturer to create an exterior paint for cars. So Toyota was the first to place an order for a quinacridone color. And the first color that they ordered was quinacridone gold. So those of you might remember that quinacridone or gold colors back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s didn't really have a really metallic sort of hue to them. They were more like a muted gold, and that was the original color that that Toyota placed using a quinacridone pigment. So quinacridone pigments are really interesting. What's really they're great for a lot of different reasons, but let's talk about some of the things that make them really interesting and unique. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward here, and we're going to look at the line and all, and kind of look at some of the attributes with these colors. So here is quinacridone coral. Quinacridone coral is a beautiful, luscious red, but let's talk about kind of what some of its attributes are. Really, one of the really cool things with this is really just how light fast these colors are. Quinacridone colors are so light fast, actually, that we don't even have an ability to properly tell us how light fast they actually are. They are actually way off the end of the spectrum in terms of how long they are light fast for. They are beyond 120 years. So a lot of light fastness with these colors. They're also really transparent. If any of you like to layer color, these colors are wonderful for that because they create really bright and beautiful mixes with other colors. They're very luminous. They add brightness to anything you decide that you want to blend with it. They're also low staining, meaning that they're really easy to work with because they're able to be lifted pretty readily. So you're able to, while they're wet, you're able to go ahead and get a paper towel, and you're able to lift these to be able to create texture and things like that. So they're really wonderful in terms of being able to lift. Granulating is something that's very interesting. The majority of the quinacridone colors are not granulating, but there are a few that we did allow so that they would granulate. So I want to kind of go back here and just look at the chemical structure again. And there's a few things here that really kind of shed light on why quinacridone colors present the way that they do. So what's interesting about the particles on a quinacridone pigment is that the rings, for example, they are all the same size, the same shape, and the same weight. So all of the particles, all of the rings are identical to each other. Now, what's great about that is that this is how the transparency is made, because the colors are essentially all the same shape, weight, and size. So they literally come together in a way that is very, very exact, very clean. So think about this, if you will. If you had a jigsaw puzzle and all of the pieces were all the same shape, everything would come together in a very seamless way. And that is what we see here. So all of those rings come together in a very seamless way. And this is how colors in the quinacridone range become transparent, because those particles lay together very cleanly, and the quality of the pigment allows them to be able to, allows light to be able to pass through. So, and this has to happen because of the way that the particles are all identical to each other. Another interesting aspect to them, as we were talking about granulation, is if we wanted to make quinacridone colors granulate, we can do that just by changing the amount of time that a particular batch of quinacridone spends on what we call our dispersion mill. So a dispersion mill is a big machine, and it has 3 cylinders on it, and the cylinders all spin in opposite directions of each other. So cylinder number 1 will pass, the paint will come over the top of cylinder number 1 where it meets cylinder number 2, which is spinning in the opposite direction. So, and based upon the amount of distance between these cylinders, we're able to manipulate the actual size of the particle. So the larger we leave the particle, the more likely we are to see granulation. So we're able to manipulate granulation from particle sizes from 40 microns all the way down to 6 microns. So just to kind of put that in context, if you were to grab a sheet of copy paper from your computer, that would be about 100 microns. A color for us that granulates is typically within the 40 micron range. And then when we make a color not want to granulate, we'll process it down to 6 microns. So 6 microns, by the way, is about the size of a human red blood cell. So with this dispersion mill that we have, we're able to determine even a color that is a quinacridone, we can make a quinacridone color granulate or not granulate. And what's interesting about that is even though we're able to manipulate that, it doesn't change actually the transparency of the pigment itself. So quinacridone colors are wonderful for doing color layering exercises. So color layering exercises are great if you are trying to create depth within your work. So the way that you do this is that you take the quinacridone color, and then you lay or paint out your color. You get a hair dryer and dry it on the surface. And then you're able to go over the top and then layer another color and then hair dryer again. And what's great is with the purity of the pigment with these quinacridone colors, you potentially could end up going 4 and 5 colors deep and not create mud with these colors. So quinacridone colors are just awesome for creating color layering effects. Okay. So we're going to take a look at some of the characteristics of all 14 of these colors. We'll go through them and we'll point out some interesting things as we go along. All right, so this is quinacridone coral. The information that you see down below there is basically in the order of how you would find the information on our color chart. What is the importance of having a color chart? Why is having a color chart beneficial to you as an artist? The importance of a color chart is really simple. It's to give you all of the information that you need in order to create mixes that don't make mud. So that's why we will always include all of the pigment information so that you have an idea of what's going to happen when you blend one color with another. So in our color chart, we tell you the following things. What the color is available in, whether it's a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, or a half pan. We tell you the light fastness rating. We tell you the staining ability, whether the color granulates or not granulates. We tell you the transparency. And then lastly, we tell you what pigment was actually used to make the color. So for this color, Queen Coral, we make this color in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, and a watercolor stick. All right, James has a question. For the same average particle size, does the width of the particle size distribution affect transparency and granulation? So two things can affect transparency. Basically the building blocks of the pigment itself, and also the density of the pigment. So when we make our gouache, for example, the way that we're able to create the opaqueness of the gouache is that we use a larger ratio of gouache, a larger ratio of pigment in our gouache than our watercolor. So our gouache has 2.5 times more pigment than our watercolor does. And then the pigment load really helps us with creating the opacity for the gouache. So to answer your question, James, yes, the amount of pigment in our solution also contributes to whether that color is transparent or it's opaque. So if you think for a moment, if you add more pigment to something, it's going to make the color a little bit, or it's going to make it a lot more opaque just because those particles are closer to each other. Great question. All right. Going back to light fastness, can you tell us the range and what the number means? Absolutely. Higher numbers equal more light fastness, or lower numbers mean more light fastness. So our light fastness ratings go from 1 to 5. A 1 means that the color has excellent light fastness, meaning that that particular color is light fast beyond 100 years. If in that light fastness area you see a Roman numeral 2, it means that color has good light fastness and the color is rated to 100 years. If it's a 3, it means that color has a light fastness rating between 50 and 70 years. And any color that is fugitive, we label it as a 4. And that means that color is not light fast. It means it's going to fade within 15 to 20 years. So that is the range in which we rate our colors to. Okay, let's look at a few more quinacridone colors here. Here is quinacridone red, very bright, beautiful, luscious red. And what I really love about quinacridone red is for how bright and how beautiful it is. It has a lightness rating of 1. So this color, this quinacridone red, is rated past 120 years. Staining. So here we are with staining. So this color is actually a medium staining color. So you're going to see within this quinacridone range that there's going to be different staining abilities. This color does not granulate. And then transparency, this color is transparent. So if you were looking at our color chart and you saw an open circle, that means that color is fully transparent. And then the pigment number that is used to create quinacridone red is PV19. Okay. All right. I'm going to circle back to Marilyn here because I think she has a good question that I actually get a lot. And what happens if you blend a color that is fugitive with a color that is fully light fast? Well, a really good example here of what happens when you do that is when you look at our color opera pink. As you saw earlier, I told you that we blend opera pink with that fluorescent dye and quinacridone lilac. So what happens is, and what the answer to your question is, even though the color is blended together, it doesn't mean that the particles come together in bonds and create a light fast pigment. No, they both still exist kind of within their own solution of the paint, which therefore makes them still susceptible to light. So that's why when our opera pink fades, the fluorescent aspect goes away, but you're still left with the pink from quinacridone lilac. So just because you blend a fugitive color together with a color that is not that is light fast, doesn't mean the whole blend, therefore, is light fast. All right. Other question. What's the difference between Quin Red and Quin Rose? They have the exact same numbers here. That's very astute of you. And here's the difference. So we typically use a lot of different colors and blend them together to create other ones. But this is a situation where there are three colors actually that utilize PV19. But how can these colors be so distinctly different, even though they use the same pigment reference number? So what you have to remember about these pigment reference numbers, particularly pigment violet, 19 shades, you have to think about them as kind of an umbrella. And then what is often not really disclosed is that underneath the umbrella of these pigment numbers is that there are subshades. So we are able to buy subshades of PV19. And the way that that is able to be done is that the chemistry of the pigment. So if we go back and look at the chemical composition here of the quinacridone pigment, is that chemists are able to move these lines, these what we call markers. So you see a line below and above the second, and above and below on the fourth. So chemists are able to kind of move those markers around slightly, and it changes the way that light refracts through those. And then from there, the pigment manufacturers can create subshades for every single one of these shades. So in a lot of situations, we are able to create the subshades based upon how we're able to move those markers that you see. So in the case of quinacridone red and the other two, quinacridone rose, just based upon how we move those markers, we're able to kind of change the color slightly, but still have it fall within the umbrella, the overarching umbrella of PV19. So that is probably one of the more interesting secrets about the paint making industry, is that different manufacturers will go to pigment manufacturers and they'll say, I want something that's in the PV19 umbrella, but I want my own take on that particular color. So then the pigment manufacturers will then create subshades. So in this case, for us, we're using a different subshade for each of those different colors. So PV19, we are using 3 different subshades of it in order to create 3 very unique and distinct colors. Excellent question. Hopefully it wasn't too much in the weeds for you all. All right. So we talked about quinacridone red. Let's look at quinacridone pink. Quinacridone pink is available in a 15 mil and in a 5 mil tube. The light fastness rating is a 1, so it means that this color is light fast beyond 100 years. And you're probably wondering, what does that NR mean? So basically, when because we have a xenon phaedometer in our lab, if we have a situation where a particular pigment has been certified for light fastness because it's used in another color, we may not send the color to our governing body, which is called ASTM. ASTM is the governing body which tests all pigments and colors for light fastness. But since PV42 is used in another color that has been tested, we will just use our machine to certify the light fastness. All right, here we are. The staining level of this color is a 2. So you're able to lift this color pretty readily, which is interesting. Does this color granulate? No, it does not. And then the transparency is, this color is fully transparent, and it utilizes pigment violet, 40-second shade. All right. Quinacridone pink. Oops, sorry. Quinacridone rose. Here's another area where we see PV19. You may look at quinacridone rose here and see something that's very different from quinacridone red. So quinacridone, so what we have here with quinacridone rose is this particular color is made in a 15 mil tube, 5 mil tube, and a half pan. The light fastness rating is a 1, means the color is light fast beyond 100 years. And this is interesting. The color is actually a 3. So this is a medium staining color. So the question is, why is there a difference between this color, quinacridone rose, and another quinacridone color that is only a 2? So basically, when you start moving around the markers on the rings, it can also change the way that the color interacts with the paper. And the paper, depending upon who makes it, certain colors, certain quinacridone colors are a little bit more aggressive when it is exposed to the paper and how it attaches itself to the fibers. So in this case, because of how we've manipulated the chemical structure, it makes it another level of staining. All right, the color granulates, yes or no. So no, it doesn't granulate. And once again, the color is fully transparent, and the pigment that's used is PV19. All right, moving along. All right, quinacridone lilac. This is another beautiful color. Only available in a 15 mil tube. Light fastness is a 2 here, which is interesting. So this color is only rated to 100 years. So what happens here is, depending upon how those markers are, it actually allows a little bit more light in, and it allows the sunlight to hit the particles in such a way that it allows the particles to be a little bit more susceptible to light. Staining, this is a medium staining color, and it's granulating. It's not granulating, excuse me, and then it's fully transparent. And this quinacridone color falls under PR, pigment red, 122nd shade. Okay. All right. We're going to just move forward here a little more quickly. Quinacridone magenta, light fastness rating of 1 over 120 years. More staining, it's a 3. So this color you're going to lift about, be able to lift about 50% of them, maybe a little more than that, maybe 50%. The color does not granulate. And once again, color is fully transparent. Quinacridone fuchsia. Very bright color, light fastness rating of 1, medium staining color, no granulation, and it's fully transparent and falls under pigment red, 202nd shade. Quinacridone violet, available in a 15 ml tube, 5 ml tube, and a watercolor stick. I don't think I stopped on watercolor stick. We talked quite a bit about them the last time we were together. Watercolor sticks are a dry version of, or a pan version of, a tube of paint. Basically, when we make our watercolor sticks, they only use the pigment and the gum arabic to make the stick. And then it's put through an evaporator where it is where we dry or heat the color till it dries to kind of a firm sort of substance, like a stick, or excuse me, or like a pan. Sorry. So they're great for travel. This color is available in a stick. It's great for travel. Because the sticks are dry, and they're able to be used in a multitude of different applications in terms of the way you use them. Staining, this is interesting. Quinacridone violet, because of the way that the particles are kind of aligned and joined, is a 4. So this is a highly staining color. So, for example, a highly staining color is not able to be lifted at all, which is very interesting with this particular color. And it's great. It does not granulate. It's non-granulating. Interestingly enough, all of these sorts of criteria can all live independent of themselves. So even though a color can be a 4 for staining, it doesn't mean that the color can't be transparent. I always found that kind of fascinating about how those two things can be true at the same time. And then here's another interesting thing. Here's another color. Here's another color that falls under PV19, pigment violet, 19th shade. All right, quinacridone purple, available in 15 ml tube and 5 ml tube. Light fastness rating of 1, so it's light fast beyond 100 years. It's a 3 in terms of its staining ability, so you'll be able to lift about half of this color. Granulating, no, it does not granulate. And the transparency is fully transparent. So this is this category of color is another one that's great if you like to layer color. And this also falls under pigment violet, 55th shade. All right. So what's interesting to me about the quinacridone colors is really just the array of colors that fall under this family of pigment, and how we can go from colors that are purples and go all the way to colors that are gold. So the way that happens is that we talk about those markers all the way back in the beginning. Those markers are able to be moved to other rings. And when that happens, when light passes through it, it changes or bends the wavelength of the light. And when you bend and change the wavelength of the light, it changes what our eyes see. Our eyes, excuse me, are wonderful for being able to interpret different levels or different angles of light that come from the everyday things that you and I see. So if you think, for example, about a crystal and you put the crystal to the light and you change the angle of the crystal, our eyes will interpret a different color. So just simply by chemists changing the location of those markers changes the way that light bends as it comes through the pigment. So based upon that, that's how we're able to get such a diversity of color just by changing the way that light refracts through the pigment. So here's quinacridone gold. This is one of my favorite colors. It's my favorite because this color is actually super awesome to blend with. A little bit of this color really goes a long way. And it's actually very aggressive when you blend it with other colors. But it does remarkable things with reds, greens, and blues. So if you're interested in making a fall foliage color, for example, you could take a green, like green apatite, and just put a little bit of quinacridone gold in it, and you can create some remarkable fall foliage with oranges and reds and different greens. But quin gold is really a remarkable color to do some blending with. All right, I saw that we have a question about quin golds here. The question is, how does this new formulation of quin gold hold up against the new formula? So probably do a little bit of backtracking and do a little bit of history. The original quinacridone pigment, which was pigment orange 49th shade, so PO49, was the original formulation of quinacridone gold. And then in the year 2000, the automotive industry stopped using PO49. And what ended up happening is that the pigment manufacturers then decided to discontinue PO49, which is the original formulation of quinacridone gold. So Daniel Smith found the last remaining stockpiles of the original quinacridone gold when other manufacturers had to move away from it. So we found enough PO49 to last us 17 years. So in the year 2017, our original single pigment solution for PO49 went away, and we had to reformulate in order to continue to make the color available to artists. So when we did that, we took a blend of PO48, pigment orange, 48th shade, and then we blended it with PY150, pigment yellow, 150th shade, also known as nickel titanate yellow. So we blended PO48, PY150 together to create a synthesized version of what the original looks like. So that is the difference between the original and the new formulation of quinacridone gold. So is there a difference? When you blend them out, if you were to do a side by side of the old version versus the new version, and you put them side by side, you might see a little bit of a difference when it's wet, but when the new version, PO48, PY150, when you allow that to dry versus the old version, it is really close. So the only way really to tell the difference between the old version and the new version is to see what it looks like wet. But if you allow them to dry, you will notice that it's pretty darn tough to tell the difference between the two. Great question. So here is quinacridone deep gold. Quinacridone deep gold, we make it in a 15 ml tube. and a 5 mil tube only. It has excellent light fastness. It's a low staining color, so this color lifts really well. It's also a low staining color, so you're able to lift the majority of this color, but it'll leave behind just a little bit of a glow. It is a non-granulating color. It is fully transparent, and it utilizes PO48 and PY150. So now you're probably wondering, well, how can these two colors be different? So this is a situation where what we'll do is we'll use a little bit more pigment of PO48 to create that little bit darker hue in order to create this color. So not only do we have chemistry available to us to kind of give us a different take on a color, but we can also work with the actual quantities of the product that's used to make the paint. So in this case, Quinacridone Deep Gold, we use a little bit more pigment in the formulation to give the color a slightly different look. Quinacridone Burnt Orange, this is another great color. We make it in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, and a half pan. So basically it's available in all of our formats. Once again, extremely light fast beyond 100 years. Staining ability, it's a low staining color, so you're able to lift it pretty readily. Now, here's something interesting. This color, Quinacridone Burnt Orange, granulates. So this is a situation where we didn't mill down the particle size so small that it made the color not granulate. So we wanted to create something different in the industry with this Quinacridone color. So we went ahead and left the particle size larger. Transparency, fully transparent color, utilizes pigment PO48, pigment orange 48th shade. Quinacridone Sienna, 3 formats, 15 mil tube, 5 mil tube, and a watercolor stick. Excellent light fastness beyond 100 years. Low staining, so that great color to be able to lift with. Non-granulating color, N for no, so it's a non-granulating color. Fully transparent, and we utilize 3 pigments here to make this version of Quinacridone Sienna. PO48, PR209, and PY150. This is one of my favorite Quinacridone colors just for how vibrant it is. And lastly, Quinacridone Scarlet, Burnt Scarlet, excuse me. Available in a 15 mil tube, 5 mil tube, and watercolor stick. It has a light fastness rating of 1. It's rated past 120 years. Staining ability is a 2, so it lifts pretty readily. It's a non-granulating color, and it's fully transparent, and it utilizes pigment red 206 shade. All right, so that's Quinacridones. And any questions before I kind of move on? All right. So other things that I think are important for you to know. What information is on the tubes? So sometimes, you may not have your handy dandy color chart available to you, and you want to know some of the more critical things about the color, especially if you're at our good friend there, Delta Art, and you're in the store and you wanted to choose a tube of paint. So I think it's always important to understand the information that you have available to you that's there on the tube. So we give you the pigment information, so meaning what is the scientific name for the pigment, the vehicle, which will always refer to the binder that's used, the light fastness rating, and the series number. So remember, series has to do kind of with the cost of the product. So if it's it ranges from 1 to 5. So if it's a 1, that is on the lower end, and if the color is a 5, it is on the high end. So here's a kind of a look at the tube at a tube itself. So if you look at the very top there, we're talking about cobalt teal blue here. So where it says pigment, we give you the scientific name. So light green oxide, otherwise known as PG50. And then the second piece of information is the vehicle. We said that was the binder. And the binder for our products is gum arabic. And then if you look down there at the bottom, underneath the word made in the USA, it says Series 2. So remember, Series 2 has to do with the cost. And then lastly, it has the Lightfastness rating. So you see a Roman numeral 1 there, which means the Lightfastness rating is beyond 100 years for this color, cobalt teal blue. So I always think that information is important, especially when we're talking about the information that's available to you. Okay. Well, I know we went through a lot of that very quickly. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Kristen at Delta Art, and she will be sure to send me your email address and your questions. I love getting questions from folks. I love education in general. And I just wanted to take the time again to thank you all for your support of Daniel Smith. And I look forward to coming back here again.
Oh, we have a last minute question. Will there be other quinacridone colors?
Well, interestingly about that is that the art materials industry is highly dependent upon other industries in terms of the colors we have. So is it possible to have other colors of quinacridone? Sure. But it usually means that we have to rely upon other industries in order to have other colors made available to us. Is it possible to have more quinacridone colors? Absolutely. It just means that it needs to be made available as a byproduct of another industry using the pigment.
Thank you, Scott.
All righty. All right, everyone. Hopefully everyone has a wonderful summer and has a great day. And I will look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye-bye.